I accused my perfect husband of cheating, and now he's sleeping in the guest room. How do I fix this mess? I always felt like I had won the lottery with my husband, Mark. We've been together for 9 years, married for 5, and every day I still look at him and wonder how I got so lucky. He's the kind of man who turns heads everywhere we go. Tall, fit, charming, with that magnetic personality that just draws people in. Women notice him, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't make me insecure sometimes. But Mark has never given me a single reason to doubt him. He's a great provider, an incredible father to our 2-year-old son, and the kind of man who wakes up early to make breakfast and coffee for the family every day. But recently, something changed. About 6 weeks ago, Mark's routine shifted, and my mind immediately went to the worst possible place. Normally, Mark would leave for work at a reasonable hour, giving us time to have breakfast together and say goodbye. But suddenly, he started leaving earlier, barely sticking around long enough to make his coffee before rushing out the door. At first, I thought maybe he was just busy at work, but as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I work part-time from home a few days a week, so I'm usually there when Mark comes home in the evenings. He would often go straight to his home office to finish up work or head to the garage to squeeze in a workout. I know I've been guilty of interrupting him, asking him to help me with random tasks around the house or pulling him away to spend time with our son. Mark never complained, but looking back, I realized that maybe I'd been taking his patience for granted. One night, I made the mistake of sharing my concerns with my friends. They're the type who always seem to think the worst, and when I told them about Mark's new early morning routine, they immediately jumped to conclusions. "He's definitely seeing someone," one of them said, rolling her eyes as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Men don't just change their habits out of nowhere." I didn't want to believe it, but the seed of doubt had been planted. My friends convinced me that I needed to find out what was really going on, and in a moment of weakness, I did something I'm not proud of. I snooped. Mark's phone was always lying around, and he never bothered to put a lock on it because he trusted me completely. One morning, while he was in the shower, I grabbed his phone and scrolled through his messages, looking for anything that might explain his sudden change in behavior. But there was nothing. No suspicious texts, no secret phone calls, nothing that pointed to infidelity. Still, my friends weren't satisfied. They suggested that Mark was too smart to get caught so easily and that I should start tracking his location to see where he was really going in the mornings. I knew it was wrong, but my paranoia got the best of me, and I ended up sharing his location with my phone. The next day, I watched as Mark left early once again. My heart was pounding as I checked his location, half expecting to see something that would confirm my worst fears. When I saw that he had stopped at a hotel, my blood ran cold. I couldn't think straight. All I could see was red. I called my neighbor, asked her to watch our son, and drove straight to the hotel, ready to confront my husband and catch him in the act. When I got there, I was a mess, angry, hurt, and terrified of what I might find. I checked his location again and saw that he was at a small diner attached to the hotel. I marched in, determined to confront him, but when I found Mark, he wasn't with another woman. He was sitting alone in a booth, eating breakfast with his laptop open, completely oblivious to the chaos going on in my head. Mark looked up, surprised to see me standing there. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice calm but confused. I felt a rush of relief, but also a wave of guilt for jumping to conclusions. I tried to explain that I was worried and that my friends had convinced me he was cheating. Mark's expression shifted from confusion to disappointment. He closed his laptop, paid for his meal, and looked at me with a mix of hurt and frustration. "I can't believe you thought I would do that," he said quietly, "and that you'd trust your friends over me." He didn't yell or make a scene. He just looked at me with this deep sadness that broke my heart. Mark left the diner without another word, and I was left standing there, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. That night, I tried to make it up to him. I cleaned the house, cooked dinner, something I rarely did because Mark was the better cook, and tried to act like everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Mark barely spoke to me, and when it was time for bed, he took a pillow and went to sleep in the guest room. I could hear him tossing and turning all night, and every minute felt like a knife in my chest. The next few days were torture. Mark was distant, cold, and completely shut down. He barely looked at me, barely spoke, and every time I tried to apologize, he just brushed me off. I felt like I was losing him, and I didn't know how to fix it. Then, yesterday, he dropped a bombshell. He wasn't coming home that night. He said he needed space and would be staying with a friend for a few days. I've never felt so lost. I love Mark more than anything, and the thought of losing him over something so stupid is tearing me apart. I don't know how to make this right, and I don't know if Mark will ever forgive me. I'm scared that I've ruined everything, and I'm desperate for a way to fix this before it's too late. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, replaying everything over and over in my mind. How had things gotten so bad so quickly? Just a week ago, we were laughing over dinner, making plans for the weekend, and now Mark was avoiding me like I was some kind of stranger. I kept telling myself that he just needed time, that once he cooled off, we could talk and work things out. But the silence was unbearable, and every hour that passed felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I couldn't sit still. I cleaned the house obsessively, trying to distract myself from the crushing guilt and fear that were gnawing at me. I kept my phone close, hoping Mark would call or text, but every time I looked at the screen there was nothing. I wanted to scream at my friends for putting these ridiculous ideas in my head, but I knew that wasn't fair. I was the one who let my insecurities get the best of me. I was the one who didn't trust my husband. The next morning I decided I couldn't just sit around waiting. I needed to do something to show Mark how sorry I was, to prove to him that I still believed in us. I went to the gym, hoping to burn off some of my anxious energy and maybe think of a way to make things right. As I ran on the treadmill, all I could think about was how stupid I had been. Mark had always been open with me, always made me feel secure, and I had thrown that all away because of some baseless paranoia. After my workout, I drove to the store and picked up all of Mark's favorite things, his favorite snacks, a new set of workout gear, and even a book he'd mentioned wanting to read. I spent the entire afternoon preparing a nice dinner, hoping that maybe, just maybe, when he came home, we could start to put this behind us. But when Mark walked through the door, the expression on his face told me that dinner wasn't going to fix anything. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all, and he barely glanced at the meal I had spent hours preparing. "You didn't have to do all this," he said flatly, setting his bag down by the door. "I'm not hungry." I tried to engage him, to get him to talk, but Mark was completely checked out. He sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I sat across from him, feeling helpless and desperate. But every time I tried to start a conversation, he would just nod or give one-word answers. The distance between us felt like an insurmountable wall, and I had no idea how to break it down. That night, Mark slept in the guest room again, and I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing with all the things I wanted to say to him, but I didn't know where to start. I wanted to beg him to forgive me, to tell him that I was scared of losing him, and that's why I acted so irrationally. But I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, I'd just drive him further away. The next day, I decided to try a different approach. I wrote Mark a letter, something I hadn't done since we were first dating. I poured my heart out on the page, admitting my insecurities, my fears, and my regrets. I told him how much I loved him, how grateful I was for everything he'd done for our family, and how deeply sorry I was for not trusting him. I folded the letter and left it on his pillow, hoping that maybe reading my words would help him understand how much I wanted to fix things. When Mark came home, I anxiously watched as he found the letter. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable, and when he finished, he folded it neatly and set it aside. I waited for him to say something, anything, but he just looked at me with this sadness in his eyes that broke my heart all over again. "I appreciate the letter," he said quietly, "but I need some more time." I nodded, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I wanted to ask him how much time, to know when we could finally start rebuilding what was broken, but I didn't. I just watched as he retreated back to the guest room, closing the door behind him. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's distance only seemed to grow. He would come home, go through the motions, and then retreat to his own space, barely interacting with me or our son. I felt like I was living with a stranger, and every attempt I made to bridge the gap between us seemed to fall flat. I was running out of ideas, out of hope, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was it. If I had lost the man I loved because of my own foolishness. One night, after putting our son to bed, I finally mustered up the courage to confront Mark. I knocked on the door of the guest room, my heart pounding in my chest. He opened it, looking tired and worn down, but he let me in. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking, and looked at him with tears in my eyes. "Mark, I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix this, but I need you to know how much I love you. Please talk to me. Tell me what I can do." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, okay? I need time to figure things out. This isn't just about what you did. It's about everything. I need to know that you trust me, and right now, I don't feel that." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always thought of trust as something unbreakable between us, but now it felt like a fragile, shattered thing. I nodded, feeling the weight of my mistakes more heavily than ever. I wanted to promise him that I'd never doubt him again, but I knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. I had to show him somehow that he was the most important thing in my life, and that I was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. The days dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Mark continued to keep his distance, and I could feel our relationship unraveling little by little. I missed him so much, missed the warmth of his presence, the easy way we used to laugh together, and the feeling of being on the same team. Now, it felt like we were on opposite sides, both of us struggling with our own hurt and disappointment. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Mark came into the kitchen, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. He set his phone down on the counter, and for a moment I thought he was going to tell me he was leaving for good. My heart sank, but I braced myself for whatever was coming next. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've been thinking a lot, and I think it's time we figure out what's really going on here." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm listening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark sat down at the kitchen table, motioning for me to join him. "Look, I'm not perfect," he began, his eyes fixed on the table. "I know I've been distant, and maybe I haven't been the most present husband lately, but the way you went about this, sneaking around, listening to your friends, it made me feel like you don't trust me at all, like you see me as the enemy." I opened my mouth to protest, but Mark held up his hand, stopping me. "I'm not saying you're entirely wrong for feeling the way you did. I get that it's hard to see me leaving early and not knowing why. But instead of talking to me, you went behind my back. That's what hurts the most." I felt the tears welling up, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Mark, I never wanted to hurt you," I said, my voice trembling. "I was scared, okay? I've seen how women look at you, and I let my insecurities get the best of me. I should have trusted you, I know that now. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make you believe that I love you and that I want us to work." Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't have all the answers either, but I think the first step is being honest with each other. No more sneaking around, no more listening to people who don't have our best interests at heart. We need to start talking again, really talking, if we're going to fix this." I nodded, feeling a small glimmer of hope. This was the first real conversation we'd had in weeks, and even though it was painful, it felt like we were finally addressing the elephant in the room. I told Mark everything, how my friends had planted doubts in my mind, how I'd let my fears and insecurities cloud my judgment, and how much I regretted violating his trust. I admitted that I had taken him for granted, assuming that he would always be there no matter what. Mark listened quietly, occasionally nodding or asking a question, but mostly just letting me get everything off my chest. When I finished, he took a deep breath and looked at me with those familiar, kind eyes that I had missed so much. I appreciate you being honest, he said softly. But it's going to take time for me to get over this. I can't just forget about what happened overnight. I knew he was right. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt with a single conversation or a heartfelt apology. It was something that had to be earned day by day through actions and consistency. I told Mark that I was willing to do whatever it took to prove myself to him, and that I would never make the same mistake again. In the weeks that followed, we worked on rebuilding the foundation of our marriage brick by brick. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the old fears crept back in, when I wondered if Mark would ever be able to look at me the way he used to, but we were both committed to making it work, and that was what mattered. Mark started coming home earlier, making an effort to spend more time with our son and with me. We went on walks, talked about our days, and slowly started reconnecting in a way that felt genuine and real. I stopped listening to my friend's unsolicited advice, focusing instead on my own intuition and the conversations I was having with Mark. We even started going to couples therapy, something I never thought we'd need, but it helped us understand each other better and learn how to communicate without the walls we had built up. One day, Mark finally opened up about why he had been going to the hotel diner in the first place. He admitted that work had been overwhelming, and he felt like he couldn't get a moment of peace at home to clear his head. The hotel diner became his escape, a quiet place where he could think, work, and just have a moment to himself. It wasn't about me or our marriage. It was about him needing a breather from the constant demands of life. Hearing this, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I had been so wrapped up in my own fears that I hadn't even considered what Mark might be going through. I apologized again, this time not just for doubting him, but for not being the partner he needed during a stressful time. Mark squeezed my hand, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were on the same page. Things didn't magically go back to the way they were, but we were making progress. We were talking, laughing, and slowly rediscovering the things that made us fall in love in the first place. Mark started opening up more, sharing his thoughts and feelings in a way he hadn't before, and I did my best to listen without jumping to conclusions or letting my insecurities get the best of me. I learned that rebuilding trust isn't about grand gestures or quick fixes. It's about the little things, the moments of vulnerability, the apologies, the quiet reassurances that say, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." And while I knew we still had a long road ahead, I also knew that we were stronger together, and that was enough to keep us moving forward. As the weeks turned into months, Mark and I continued to work on our relationship, slowly but surely. We celebrated small victories, like the first time Mark joined me for dinner at the table instead of eating alone in the guest room, or when we laughed together over a silly movie on a Friday night. These moments felt like tiny stitches mending the fabric of our marriage, pulling us closer bit by bit. I learned to cherish them, knowing that rebuilding trust would be a marathon, not a sprint. We continued our therapy sessions, and it was in one of those meetings that I finally understood the depth of Mark's hurt. He confessed that my actions hadn't just broken his trust, they had made him question his own worth in our relationship. "I've always tried to be a good husband," he said, his voice cracking. "I've always put you and our son first, but it felt like none of that mattered when you listened to those doubts. It felt like I wasn't enough." Hearing him say that shattered me. I had been so consumed by my insecurities that I hadn't realized how deeply my actions had cut him. It was a painful but necessary revelation, and it pushed me to be more conscious of the way I approached our relationship. I stopped second-guessing every little thing and started focusing on being present, on showing Mark that he was more than enough for me. One evening, as we were putting our son to bed, Mark turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in a long time. "I miss us," he said quietly. "I miss the way things used to be, and I want to get back there." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I miss us too," I whispered, "but I think we're getting there, one day at a time." We decided to take a weekend away, just the two of us, leaving our son with my mom. It was the first time in a long time that we had truly focused on each other, without the noise of our everyday lives getting in the way. We talked about our dreams, our fears, and all the things that had been weighing us down. We laughed, we cried, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we reconnected on a deeper level. During one of our quiet moments together, Mark told me about his struggles at work, how he had been passed over for a promotion he'd been working toward for years, and how it had made him feel like a failure. He admitted that he had been hiding his stress because he didn't want to burden me, but it had been eating away at him. The early mornings at the diner were his way of trying to cope, to find some peace in the chaos. I felt a pang of guilt, realizing how much he had been dealing with on his own. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you," I said, holding his hand. "I should have noticed. I should have asked." Mark squeezed my hand back, a small smile playing on his lips. "We both made mistakes," he said softly, "but we're learning, and that's what matters." Our weekend away was a turning point. It didn't erase the hurt or magically fix everything, but it reminded us why we had fallen in love in the first place. We returned home feeling lighter, more hopeful, and committed to continuing the work we had started. Mark slowly began to open up to me again, letting me in on the parts of his life that he had kept guarded. He started working on a new project at work, one that he was passionate about, and I made a conscious effort to support him in every way I could. We started new routines together, carving out time for each other amidst the busyness of our lives, and making sure we were truly present when we were together. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Mark turned to me with a soft smile. "You know, I never thought we'd get here," he admitted. "There were times when I thought this was it for us." I nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude for how far we had come. "Me too," I confessed, "but I'm so glad we didn't give up." Mark pulled me close, resting his forehead against mine. "I love you," he said, the words carrying a weight of all the things we'd been through. "I've always loved you, even when it was hard." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of his embrace. "I love you too," I whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." In the end, our journey wasn't about returning to the way things used to be. It was about creating something new, something stronger. We learned to communicate better, to be honest with each other about our fears and insecurities, and to never take our relationship for granted. It wasn't always easy, and there were still days when the old doubts would creep in, but we faced them together, knowing that our commitment to each other was worth the effort. Mark and I still have our ups and downs, but I no longer see them as signs of failure. Instead, I see them as opportunities to grow, to learn, and to keep building the life we want together. And while we can't change the mistakes we made, we can choose to move forward with forgiveness, love, and the unshakable belief that no matter what, we are enough.